The original idea for this ROM hack was motivated by a few key issues I've always had with the Gen 1 Pokemon games. And that's not to say I disliked Gen 1 at all. In fact, it's one of my favorites, along with Gen 2. But there is a common sentiment among Pokemon fans, and it's something like, because Gen 1 doesn't represent what I know the modern games to be like, and because it has a lot of bugs, it's a bad game. And I never agreed with this. I fully recognize its flaws, but being that I grew up playing Gen 1, I can appreciate it for what it is, and it's Pokemon. A lot of the aspects which are commonly considered flaws are things that I instead like to frame as simply challenges which apply in that particular iteration of the game. Things like TM disposability, some broken moves like Bind, or the lack of full movesets for certain Pokemon. These are all things which I like to think of, while I'm doing a playthrough of Gen 1, simply as constraints. When it comes to the solutions that later games implemented to address those problems, I'm glad for those too. I like to think of each generation of Pokemon as its own thing, and when I'm playing a particular generation, my brain adjusts to the applicable set of constraints for that generation. It's a good thing in my opinion, as it allows for different approaches depending on the generation you're playing. But alas, there are people who regard Gen 1 as fundamentally flawed and therefore bad, and that's fine, I suppose. To each their own. All that being said, I did make a statement hinting that there are issues that I've had with Gen 1. So what am I, a hypocrite? Well, I'll be honest. I do think there are some problems that exist in Gen 1 that could be addressed to create a slightly enhanced experience. But for the most part, the solutions I propose aren't ones which really address any bugs in the game engine or flaws in the developer's design choices. There are some exceptions to this, but I should be more specific. So here's a list of the issues in vanilla which I believe are worth addressing in a hypothetical enhancement ROM hack. Number 1. All 151 Pokemon are not obtainable in either version, so trading with another cartridge is necessary. Number 2. Certain Pokemon only evolve via trading. This cannot be achieved with only one cartridge. Number 3. HMs are frequently used throughout the game, which leads to either the necessity of an HM slave or the sacrificing of some of your Pokemon's move slots. In either case, your party's full potential is reduced. Whenever I was doing a Gen 1 playthrough, these were the things which consistently made me long for a slightly different reality. I wanted to be able to get any Pokemon from my party first of all. I didn't want to choose the version I played based on Pokemon availability. I also wanted to be able to use any of the 4 trade evolutions without needing to actually trade a friend, or even just another cartridge that I owned, via link cable. And I wanted the option to use the in-game trade exclusive Pokemon without being afflicted with the boosted experience and disobedience curse. The HM situation was also always a bit of an inconvenience for me. I always felt kind of bummed that I needed to limit certain Pokemon in my party to only having 3 moves, for example. It felt like a waste of that Pokemon's potential. If I really wanted to, I could keep specific HM slaves in the PC and then withdraw them only in instances that I need them. In fact, maybe this has always been what was intended. But this seems a little crazy to me. Either way, the fact that it can be done that way, even if that would be incredibly tedious, sort of makes me feel that I have creative license to mitigate that issue in a ROM hack. So all that being said, I came up with the following general solutions to my issues. 1. All 151 Pokemon should be obtainable in one game. 2. Trades should be performable in-game via a trade-back NPC. 3. HMs should not occupy a Pokemon's regular move slots. The philosophy is captured pretty well in the name I chose for the ROM hack, Solus. It's a word which is used as a stage direction for a male character. I think it's Latin or something. But the point is, it highlights the solo aspect of the philosophy. The main motivation for this ROM hack was to create a version of Gen 1 which was an enhanced solo experience. That is to say, everything should be able to be done in-game by yourself, without relying on other people, or cartridges more realistically, to trade with. Beyond that, it should also address some annoyances if it doesn't affect the overall feel of the game. In my eyes, the previously mentioned HM issue was the most important annoyance to address. Related to that, this ROM hack also shouldn't alter the vanilla game too much if possible. I don't want to creep into correcting all of the developers' mistakes for the good of the game territory. As I said in the intro, I appreciate Gen 1 for what it is. I would like my Romhack to highlight Gen 1's characteristics, not overshadow them. Before I get into the specifics of the choices I made to satisfy those solutions, I should talk a bit about the methodology. More specifically, how I'm going about doing all of this in the first place. Well, if it weren't for the existence of the Pokered disassembly, I wouldn't have been able to do this project at all. The disassembly is the work of the Pokemon reverse engineering team, and it's available to fork on GitHub. Actually, they've done disassemblies for various other Pokemon games. I encourage you to check out their GitHub page if you're interested. So what is a disassembly? Essentially, it's a recreation of the original Z80 assembly code, which is then compiled into the ROMs for Red and Blue. I didn't have prior experience with the Z80 assembly. It does help to have a baseline understanding when working with the codebase, but my general takeaway is that it was pretty difficult. But it's an interesting challenge nonetheless. Without having a comprehensive understanding of the code, it's still possible to make generalizations about what certain parts of the code are doing, and make adjustments accordingly for your purposes. The whole project took me about a month and a half from start to completion. Granted, this Romhack is quite small in scope, but I'm still satisfied with that amount of time, as I thought it would have taken much longer. So the next step was to actually address those three major issues I sought out to solve: Pokemon availability, trait evolutions, and field moves. Regarding the non-availability of all 151 Pokemon in vanilla, the most glaring example of this lies in the version exclusives. For example, Oddish vs Bellsprout, Growlithe vs Vulpix, and Electabuzz vs Magmar, among several others. So for the Kanto routes which differ in their wild Pokemon, I modified the encounter slots so that both version exclusives would appear in my Romhack. In other words, I merged the wild encounters. Take Route 4 as an example. The snippet here is taken from the file containing Route 4's wild encounters. The total number of slots, if you take into account the conditional statements which vary depending on whether it's being used for red version or blue version, is 10. In my Romhack, I've made changes to accommodate 12 encounter slots per map. This gives me enough wiggle room to do the merging I was referring to. Now take a look at this next snippet. This is taken from Route 4's file in my Romhack. It merges the version exclusives, in this case Ekans and Sandshrew, and it increases the total number of encounter slots to 12. It's also important to note that the order of the Pokemon in these files matters. Specifically, the positions in the list dictate the encounter rate for whichever Pokemon is in that slot, totaling 100%. So I refactored these lists in such a way that retains the original distribution for each Pokemon and level combination, only making minor adjustments to the existing scheme if I needed to merge some version exclusives between red and blue. This is what I did for every map in the game, which took care of the non-availability of the majority of version exclusive Pokemon. However, there were still some problematic cases, like the starter Pokemon, Mew, and some others like Lickitung and Mr. Mime, which are only obtainable via in-game trades. I wanted to ensure that those Pokemon which were in-game trade only were available through other means, since I didn't want them to be subject to the boosted experience and disobedience curse. So they were added to the wild in most cases, and when choosing where I'd place them, I always took into consideration what made sense in a Cantonian sense. I won't go into more detail than is necessary, but take Lickitung for instance. Previously, in the English releases of the game, it was only available via trading a Slowbro to an NPC on Route 18. So when looking to see where I might add Lickitung to the wild, I made sure to look at other instances of its location data, particularly in Kanto. And it turns out that Lickitung is available in a certain area of the Fuchsia Safari Zone, specifically in the Japanese release of Pokemon Blue. To me, this is enough to consider it canonical, and so that's the location for Lickitung that I settled on. Regarding those 4 Pokemon which only evolve via trade, I suppose I had more options than only adding a trade-back NPC when implementing a solution. In particular, I'm thinking of other Gen 1 Romhacks, which take the liberty of changing the evolution methods for those Pokemon. I know that one Romhack, for example, changes the evolution method from trade to level up to 37. But as you might be able to gather from my explanation of the philosophy and motivation behind this ROM hack, that won't fly for me. So indeed, I went with the tradeback NPC method. I added an NPC aptly named the Trader, who resides in Celadon City. I added a new house for him behind Celadon Department Store, since there was a bit of unused land back there, and it's nice to have him a bit hidden away. The Trader, well, trades. Simply, you can talk to him to initiate a trade dialogue, and then you are able to select any of your Pokemon to trade to him. He'll trade it right back to you, at which point it will evolve, if it's able to. By the way, the implementation of my Trader was inspired by the tutorial for a tradeback NPC in the Pokered wiki. I will leave a link to this in the description. Regarding the issue of HMs occupying a Pokemon's move slots, there are again multiple possible solutions. Perhaps you could remove the need for HMs altogether, but that goes against the philosophy. I don't want to change the fundamentals of the game in that way. Perhaps you could allow HMs to be taught to the player character instead of his Pokemon, but that's sort of nonsensical. The idea behind these HMs is that they're designed to be used by Pokemon, not humans. So the solution that I liked most was something that maintains the idea of Pokemon-centric HM usage, but prevents their battle move slots from being bogged down with unwanted HMs. Specifically, the inclusion of field move slots is what I decided on. My implementation was taken from another ROM hack, Shin Pokemon. I will leave a link to this in the description. The way these work is by giving each Pokemon a separate 5th move slot, which only accepts HMs, in addition to Dig, Teleport, and Soft Boiled, and can only be accessed in the field. This way, in order to use some HM, you'd still need to have a Pokemon in your party who can learn it, but their in-battle moveset would remain unaffected. In addition to the solutions to those core issues, my ROM hack also features a few other changes. Some of these are more cosmetic and others are closer to the gameplay itself. Starting with the cosmetic ones. Some front sprites have been changed to the yellow variants or the red-green Japanese variants. The back sprites have been upgraded to 48x48, which is a higher resolution than vanilla, and now use the Space World 1997 Gold-Silver beta sprites. A green version variant is now playable, and features the original mostly green palette when played on a Game Boy Color. The title screens for all 3 versions use a new title graphic featuring the Solus name. As far as other new features that have been added that do not fit the Solutions to Issues category, there is one, and it's the restoration of cut content, the Professor Oak battle. Professor Oak has unused trainer data in the game's codebase, and in fact there has been a known glitch for a while which lets you invoke the battle. His party Pokemon are among the highest levels in the game, so it's thought that he was meant to be a sort of final boss, akin to Red from Gold and Silver. The Oak battle can be initiated once the Pokemon League is beaten, simply by speaking to him in his lab. There are a few more details that I haven't touched on in this video, but that's because I didn't want it to be too long. If you're interested in every last detail of this ROM hack, you can read the feature log, which I will link in the description. If you want to play the ROM hack, I will also leave relevant links in the description. I hope you consider playing it, and if you do, I hope you enjoy it. Feel free to leave a comment if you'd like to offer any feedback, good or bad. And if you want to show your support, you can like this video, share it, or you can give the ROM Hacks repository a star on GitHub. Thanks for watching.